Hi, how many of you have been just waiting for a Biscuit Book Club on radio? You have your dream come true today. I hope you love Irma Bombeck because you are in for a treat today on Living a Legacy Life. I was privileged to attend the Vision Writers Conference this past year and to hear our modern day equivalent to Irma Bombeck, my new friend Marci Seither, this last March, and I'm delighted to share her wit and wisdom and thoughts on legacy, because this is a legacy podcast with all of you today. Besides writing, Marci enjoys teaching workshops, speaking, food photography. She's so talented, canning, using a drone, and anything baking anything that involves real butter. So I'm so glad to have you today, Marci. Marci, welcome. Please tell us a little bit about your family and where you live.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. It was so fun to have you in class and just didn't it feel like a family time? I mean, it really did. It did feel like a family time. I
There's
just
a lot
loved
of
it.
notes.
And then I just also love the camaraderie. And I feel like that's one of the things that people get when they think about writers' conferences. They don't understand that really you become, it kind of expands your family. So I just love that. So John and I are coming up on 40 years, and our 40-year anniversary is at the end of this month, which is crazy to think about. But we have 6 kids and 7 grandkids with one on the way. I'm from California, but in 2021, we moved to Tennessee. So we are in Knoxville, Tennessee now. So
what took you to Tennessee?
Our one son was moving to Tennessee, and he had said, kind of mentioned maybe that we should look into that because we knew we might not retire. At the time we were living in Southern California, but we were from Northern California. Okay. And after we looked into it, at first he said he was moving maybe to Idaho. Mm-hmm. And so it was like, we would love to have grandparents with us. And would you ever consider moving? And driving from Southern California to Northern California is the same distance as going from Idaho to Northern California. So it'd be like no different.
Yeah.
And so I just thought, we could look into that. And then when him and his wife said, actually, we're thinking maybe Tennessee. Wow. I was like, oh, heck no. Are you kidding? That's so far.
All right. And it's the South.
But we looked into it. I called a friend who had lived in California. She's a writer as well, Joanne Kraft. She had moved to Tennessee 10 years earlier with her husband and their kids. Mm-hmm. And she lived by where I grew up, so we had a lot of things in common. And I called her. I said, Joanne, our kids are thinking about moving to Tennessee. And she said, well, haven't you been listening to the podcast? I sent you the link. And I thought she had just paid somebody on Fiverr like $10 to come up with some graphic, Exodus, California. And she goes, no, it's a real thing. So we started listening, and it's like, you know what? We could see why our kids would want to put down roots here. So it's not so much that we couldn't stay in California or maybe even our kids, but we knew that it was a place that maybe our grandkids would eventually move to. And kind of like when our grandparents moved during the dust storms to Salinas packing sheds and just trying to find a better life for their family.
Where did you live when you were growing up? Salinas?
No, I lived in Sacramento and then behind El Dorado Hills, which was considered Folsom at the time. So I just was at my parents' house. They still live on the same 5 acres. They have Jasper, the diabetic donkey, and they have they have sheep and goats, and it's the same place that we grew up. So
that's Folsom, the Folsom Dam.
Well, it was considered Folsom the whole time I was growing up, but then they restructured it, so it's El Dorado Hills now.
Oh yeah. Well, my brother lived in Placerville for many years. So
okay,
yeah. First time I flew a plane was from LA to Sacramento to see him in Placerville. So that was it's a beautiful country up there.
It is. So I went to high school, like the exit before Placerville.
Oh, okay.
Is where yeah.
And when you move, how do you go about building a community?
That actually is not as easy when you don't have kids. When you have kids, it's so much easier because you are going to soccer, you're going to school events. And then when we moved from California to Tennessee, our youngest said, I think he was like 20 years old at the time. He's like, or almost 20. He's like, I'm not living with you. So it was the first time in 34 years, because our kids are pretty spread out in ages. It was the first time in 34 years to not have kids at home.
Wow.
So for me, the transition of when people would say, so how are you adjusting to Tennessee? Like, oh, that's a drop in the bucket compared to not having kids for
Right.
the last 34 years. So thankfully, John and I both are musical. So we both joined the choir.
Hmm.
So that was good. And then got involved with church, and the Lord brought us some friends. But the other thing is, we also knew we weren't staying there. So that makes it hard when you know that,
Hmm.
because we first moved to Gallatin, which was out of Nashville. So, and thankfully, people here are so nice. Like, they invited us over, and I had gone to church, and this women's group, this Sunday school, these gals came up to me and they're like, "We know you've only been here a couple weeks, but we're having a get together of women. We're just gonna have snacks and chat." And it was snowy, so John was gonna have to drop me off at their house and then pick me up later because he had 4-wheel drive. And I told him, I said, if this is like, if they want to talk about my oily T-zone, and if this is a Mary Kay facial thing, I am going to be calling you early. like what kind of group of women gets together and visits? Like, that's just wrong on every level. And so he dropped me off, and we had such a nice time, such a nice visit. But that was
I know
just,
what you mean, because last night I had 14 women over, and I do it about every 6 to 8 weeks. And I just find that women from all walks of life, and also those who don't have kids at home anymore, they need to find a place, especially if they're new in town.
yes.
This one gal told me last night, she goes, I guess I have to stop saying I'm new because I've been here 2 years. I go, you never have to say that, because I've been here 37 years and there's a big gap there. And also her kids are older. So if you
Yeah.
don't have a soccer team to go to or a PTA meeting or whatever, how do you make friends?
Yeah. I know for me, when we moved to Southern California, I joined Toastmasters,
Oh, perfect.
because then you are engaging with people that you don't know. And that was a great way for me. I actually met more people through Toastmasters than I did through church.
Wow.
Like, that was a great way. We moved here. Um, it's been about a year and a half that we've been in Knoxville, and we have 5 of our 7 grandkids here and 2 of our kids. So that's another thing, is you don't want just your only contacts with the outside world to
With,
be with just kids
yeah.
and your grandkids. So I had told John, I said, I really need to make friends. I need to find sisters with skin on,
Mhm.
because all my friends were,
Online.
Zoom call. And
Yeah.
so I ended up finding a Bible study that women went to, and we ended up joining that church.
Oh,
But then just joining, I think because I'm a writer, and I started writing for World Magazine. One of the things that we had to do was find local ministries. We had just been here a couple months when I found out, like, find local ministries. So I jumped in, I started researching stuff, and I met a lot of people that way. So it is harder, but there are other places to go, and to don't give up, just keep pursuing, finding people, whether it's joining a YMCA or
right.
volunteering someplace.
There were 5 women last night from my YMCA dance class.
Okay.
And we
Yeah.
don't know each other except through the YMCA and then coming to my house for wine night every 6 weeks.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I asked 2 questions, and I don't make it a religious faith-based meeting because I don't want it to be entrapment for the non-Christians, but most of them don't go to church. And so
Mhm.
I just asked 2 questions. We get so nicely acquainted. And then afterwards, there's so much natural networking and friendship building.
Mhm.
It's really been great. Um, I guess you may have already answered or touched on this. Have you ever experienced loneliness through your transitioning, and how have you dealt with it?
Yeah, I would have to say moving to Southern California was lonely for me, because it wasn't something I really had wanted to do. And because we thought, and I think it's really important too, wherever you live, it's hard to let go of things sometimes. Like, I always thought we were moving back. So I always kept my friends there. I kept my contacts there. And I think sometimes we don't make room in our hearts for new things, new people, new relationships. And so that was kind of a lonely time, but really it was lonely when we moved to Tennessee in that number one, we didn't have kids anymore. Number two, we were moved to a new culture.
Yeah.
And then I was under deadline for the lakeside retreat. So I just was okay to be by myself,
Mhm.
but then I spent even more time just by myself. So I think that loneliness factor is something that you do have to be cognizant about and make plans to not be lonely.
Well, that kind of reminds me of when a guy broke my heart, then I realized, hey, this weekend I don't have a date. So on Monday, I have to make a plan for the weekend. And I'm giving
Yeah.
that counsel to younger people when they're going through those things. I said, you will wake up on Saturday morning and go, what am I supposed to do today? And so the same thing with loneliness, like you're busy earlier in the week because you're working or whatever, but make a plan for the weekend. Hey, I'm going to have this new couple over for dinner, even though I'm the new person on the block. So I
Yeah.
think that's really wise to put it in your schedule. And even
Mhm.
if you don't feel like doing it, when it happens, you have to because you've already invited the people over.
Yeah, I even took a job. I even took a job part time at the UPS store
Oh,
because it was somebody I met, and she's like, "We're so desperate for part time help," and it's like, I could be part time help, and it
sure.
was something that gave me 2 days a week outside of the home,
There we go.
and so it's like, okay. Or, and then my daughter was like, please go back to teaching swim lessons, mom, because you were so good at it.
Huh.
So I started teaching swim lessons during the summertime when we lived in Gallatin.
Wow.
And sometimes just a reason for you to go do something like, okay, I teach on this day and this day, or I work this day and this day, doesn't mean that's going to be your career.
Right.
Maybe you just did it because somebody had a need, but you also had a need. You had a need to get out and
Right. And it's
do
not like
something.
I think women, well, men too, perhaps, but we feel like we're labeled by what we're doing. Like, oh, I'm just a thrift. I used to work at a thrift store and I loved it. But I remember this woman who worked for some high tech company said, well, what do you do? I go, I do retail. And I felt so downtrodden. She wasn't putting me down, but I felt like, oh, I do retail. Yeah, I have a master's degree. I can't remember what it's in, but that doesn't really define you. And just to realize, hey, God is using this for me to make connections, and it feeds my soul as well. I love that. Now, why do you love Irma Bombeck,
Mhm.
or do you?
I just think she is hilarious. I just think the way she takes any day, everyday things and just turns it into something. And I think it speaks back to the art of observance.
Oh,
And I think that we are losing that as a society with our phones, and we are so dialed in with our phones and stuff that we're not watching out the windows as we're driving down things or past things. We're so consumed by other distractions. But she was so observant of human nature. There was one time I was reading her book and I was laughing so hard. I can't even remember which part it was, but I even looked over at John and I'm like, are you sure you haven't been married before? Because it was universal truth.
yeah.
It was, she had a situation, but it was like, and he's just not getting it. And so I mean, I just think that she had such a knack of that.
Now,
But I love,
you
oh,
should
go
write a
ahead.
book. You should write a book like hers then.
I actually started off as family humor.
Yeah.
So when I started writing, it was for a local paper, and I wrote a family humor column about a cookie baking fiasco
Mhm.
experience with our kids. And it was for Valentine's Day. And my mom had kept saying, you should send something in to the newspaper. These are so funny, because she said they're kind of remind me of Aunt Irma Bombeck.
Yeah.
I thought, well, they're only funny to you because, and that was back in the day of you've got mail.
Yeah.
And so I thought, well, it's only funny to you because it happened to us. And she
Right.
goes, oh no, everyone in the whole office is really enjoying these. I'm like, what? So I had a friend and she said, if you ever want to write anything for publication, I totally will help you to clean something up and so that it's ready to go. So I thought, well, I'm going to do this so that my mom stops bugging me about it because I was terrible at English, didn't read extra books, was the only one ever in our high school to be demoted from electric back to manual typewriter because I was so bad. And then so my friend helped me clean this one up. She goes, it's Valentine's Day coming up. This would be a great one. It's on baking cookies with your kids. And so I remember cleaning that up, walking up and down the street, and finally working up the nerve to go in and ask if they took anything off the street. And they said, actually, you know what? The editor's gone. Why don't you go back and talk to the assistant? That's why, I mean, like how I started writing, I can't even tell anybody to do that anymore. You don't have a local paper who's going to take something off the
Yeah,
street.
our paper closed during COVID. We don't have
Yeah.
paper. So tell us the cooking baking fiasco, if you wouldn't mind telling us that.
Oh, it was so I was baking cookies. I had the idea, you know how every mom, she's got these grand ideas. She's like, you know what? And we had like 5 kids at the time. And so it's like, you know what, kids, we're just going to, and 3 of them were in school. We're just going to bake instead of buying Valentine's Day cards, like, oh, that's so, so standard. We're going to do something better. We're going to bake Valentine's Day cookies for all your classmates, and pretty soon I'm rolling out dough and stuff, and I'm doing the math. I'm like, how many cookies are we baking now? Like now we're up to like 280 cookies by the time we get everybody's, class covered, plus the bus driver and everything. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so many cookies. Pretty soon I'm like, maybe we'll just give everybody 2 cookies. And pretty soon, there's flour everywhere. The baby's crying. Mark has put 2 conversation hearts up his nose and he's pretending he's a dragon. And I'm like, okay, this is crazy. I said, you know what? It finally came down to, how about this? How about if we put a clump of dough in a Ziploc baggie with baking instructions and call it good?
Is that what you did?
No, but it was close.
Yeah. Oh, that's pretty funny.
Anyway.
What's your favorite part about writing?
I feel bad because I should be writing more. Like, I feel bad that I'm not writing more, the things that go through my mind. And I need to go back to that, just the joy of writing. But I do love it when I hear of somebody who says, oh, you know what? I just got a message from somebody, and it was a story that ran 2 years ago in Guideposts. She just private messaged me. She goes, I know you don't know me. I was so-and-so. I saw a magazine. I read your story, and it just spoke so much about marriage and stuff. I just want to thank you for that.
Wow.
And so that means a lot to me. But then I also write for our grandkids, and that's the best. But right now, I love interviewing. I worked at the newspaper. I interviewed 312 people for one column every year. It was called The Word on the Street.
Oh, wonderful.
And I would interview them about a question and then take their pictures. And so I just love interviewing people and hearing their stories. Everyone has a story worth sharing. Mm-hmm. And I feel like just being able to do that is some of my best writing, my favorite writing.
I just saw a name of a podcast, which was Tell Us About Your Mama's Kitchen.
Oh,
that's the name of the podcast. I thought, wow, wouldn't that be fun to speak on it as well as to listen to? So that is so great. Everyone has a story worth telling, sharing. What would you say to encourage the woman who says, I don't?
I would say that she needs to just pour herself a glass of tea, glass of wine, whatever you have, your wine dinners. She needs to just stop and sit a little bit. And sometimes I think we feel like our whole life has to be this big grandiose story. But what I tell people is, like my pearl earrings, I usually do wear pearls, but I also have a strand of pearls, and every strand of pearls is just made up of individual pearls. So you see the pearl necklace and you're like, oh, that's a beautiful necklace, but that beautiful necklace is comprised of small individual pearls. So maybe she needs to stop and think about, have you ever felt lost? That's a great, how did you get out of that? Have you ever felt like nobody was listening? Or have you ever been in a situation where you felt like nobody was listening to the person next to you, but you heard what they had to say?
Oh, that's so good.
How did that make you feel? Have you ever been in a situation where you did have to make a choice about either looking at the situation from one way or the other? Which way did you go, and how did it impact your life?
Mhm.
What was a teachable moment from your childhood?
Well, I think those stories will come from a good question, which you just listed
Yes.
about five good questions. My oldest daughter, who's one of the better writers in our family, challenged me. I had shown her what I was going to write next as far as a book, and I wore my sunglasses in case I would cry because she can be quite what we call point blank, and but also brilliant and a little impatient sometimes. So she's reading my notes on my phone and just scrolling it very fast. And I thought, oh, she's not even, considering all this great wisdom that I've written. And then she goes, Mom, I go, yes. Is this a Bible study? I said, no, it's not a Bible study, but it's for people who may not know the Bible. So I want to stick this in. And she goes, Mom, I want you to choose your 12 most compelling stories and then put the Bible in there somewhere. And from that is my book that's now been accepted by Elk Lake Publishing. And on my way, we were on a road trip. So on the way home, I listed 28 stories. Now, by themselves, they were a very small pearl to go
Mm-hmm.
with your necklace metaphor.
Yeah.
Stories pretty darn small. But together, I chose 22. And together, I'm hoping there'll be an impact for the Lord as well as make people go, oh, yeah, that happened to me too. Because when we can identify it with someone's story, we can learn the lesson that God has for us in their story, I think. Do you agree?
Yeah, like I mean, one of the questions, because I've taught this as a class before, like in libraries when I did a book tour.
Hmm.
And so one of the questions is, tell me about your lunchbox.
Oh, so good.
Tell me about what was in your lunch, or tell me about your lunchbox when you were growing up. And pretty soon people are talking about what they had, how their mom packed lunch, or maybe they didn't have a parent who was at home and they had hot lunch. And
Mhm.
maybe they were on food stamps, and maybe they, like, I mean, just, and it talked about stuff. So it can bring up a lot of different emotions, but even just a simple question like that
Mhm.
can bring about stuff. And pretty soon you have somebody who says, I have nothing to share. I have no good stories. And then they're talking about this,
Yeah.
about their, experience about this one topic. And it's like, okay, so that's a pearl that you need to just polish and put to the side
Yeah.
to string with the other pearls. So,
And when my mother would come visit and I'd have my friends come over, she would say, well, I have a story about that. I have a story about that. As long as they had a lot of patience, they would hear a lot of Betty Moore's stories. For the listener who thinks that they'd like to start something new and creative, but they're not sure God is leading or they're just plain scared, what counsel would you give them?
so I just listened to this book on audiobook. Have you ever heard of Peggy Rowe, Rowe? She's Mike Rowe's mom. And she wrote this book, Vacuuming in the Nude and Other Ways to Get Noticed. and, and, and I listened to it coming home from Switzerland. It was a long audiobook, and I was laughing so hard. I told my son when I got home, I said, oh, honey, thank you so much for recommending. I typed it to him in a text message. Thank you so much for telling me about Vacuuming in the Nude. I loved it. And, and then he's like, I have no idea what you're talking about, but gives us a reason to make sure we knock on the door when we come to visit. It was a difference. It was our other son who had recommended it. But she was in her 80s
Wow.
when she first published her book.
Isn't
So
that
I would encourage everybody to go get her book for
okay?
the forward alone, because she was in her 80s and she just wrote about everyday things, and she had something to share. And so if you feel like you're too old, you're too tired, please don't wait until the timing is just right, because that's just never actually going to happen. There's never, I have never looked through my day planner and just said, oh, look, here's the month of the timing's just right. Like that just hasn't popped up yet.
I'll never
But start now. Start with those small pearls. If you have something to write, there is nothing more precious to me. It's on my little bookshelf back there than my grandmother's really thin book that says My Life. It's super small,
Mhm.
but she wrote it for her kids and grandkids.
Right.
And in that, I just want you to think about this. When I did a recipe memoir for our kids and our grandkids. And I took old recipes from my grandparents, my great grandparents, all the way up to modern age. And I had some of my grandma's journals with that. I had pictures of the Depression era with that. I talked about the hardships they went through.
Mm.
And at the very end, and now I'm going to probably start crying. At the very end, I had a picture of my great grandma Tessie in this beautiful red dress. She was very striking, and me as a baby. And I'm held in her arms. And I didn't know that grandma very much.
Mm.
And I just started to cry because I told my husband, I said, you know what? It's like this is a tell, like a tell in the Old Testament or like in the biblical region of the world. When they would have a city and they would raise that city, they would build a new city on top of it.
Mm.
So that you might dig down and find three cities on top of each other because of probably location, probably because water, but that was called a tell. And so when the city was raised down, it was flattened, and they built another one on top of it. The one that was underneath it was a tell.
Mm.
And I just thought, wow, that is like what happens if we don't share our stories. There could be an archaeological dig to find out about people who lived through the dust storms. But unless my grandma shared what it was like to wake up and see the sand as high as the house and wonder how they were going to get water
Mm-hmm.
because her milk was drying up and she had just had a baby. She had a toddler at the time. And then to see that the wind blew in the opposite direction the following night and just say, praise the Lord, we made it.
Mm.
I mean, unless she were to share those stories,
Right.
that would have been a tell. I could have researched it like a dig and found out about what it was like, about dust storms, but I would never have found out what it was like for her to live through it.
Mm.
And that was like what I found with that picture of my other grandmother. If we don't share our stories, then it becomes like those cities that it's something else is built over, and nobody will ever know how your life was impacted. And if you're a Christian and we can point, how did God get you through that? Our kids are going to be able to research every single thing out. They can Google it. They can ask Siri about anything, but they will never be able to tell your testimony of how God showed up when you least likely expected him to. And so the value of sharing our stories is so that our life does not become like a tell. It becomes a living monument that's passed from one generation to the other. So I just cannot, when you talk about women who are thinking if their stories don't matter, what is it that you would want to share to the next generation so that your life isn't erased? Because every time somebody passes away, if they haven't written their stories down, a library goes with them.
Yeah, there's
And
so many times because I'm now in my early 70s, where I wish mom was still around because she wanted to say more than what we wanted to hear at
mhm.
certain times because we were so busy raising our kids or whatever we were doing that was more important than listening to our mom's stories. But towards the end, when we knew she was ready to go to glory, my brother did say, please email me all those stories that you've been talking about. And he wrote a book called Mom and Dad. And
Mm.
together for our sibling reunion after both parents passed away. And I know my folks would be so pleased that he took the time to do that. And my kids have read it. And so they know, actually, I don't think I've even finished it, but of course I heard the stories firsthand, some of them. But to see those old photographs that my dad loved showing every time we would visit, and now it's in a book form. And even just to self-publish it yourself is just such a great tribute. In fact, for their 70th wedding anniversary party, I asked all my siblings and their kids to send us recipes, and we made a family cookbook. And it was a surprise to my folks. And
Mm.
I bought like 25, and of course, we sold them all at the party and had to order more. And my dad would call me and say, Sue, I need more cookbooks because he started passing them out like cigars and he doesn't even smoke a cigar. And I go, Dad, they're expensive. You have to start paying me now. So, he would start paying me. But he was so proud of it. He doesn't even cook. But the whole idea was he was an amateur photographer. So we had our Christmas pictures done by him every year, and they are throughout the book. So
Oh, yeah.
not so many stories that yours has, but what a easy, I got the idea from going to the UPS store, and there I was just waiting for my job to be finished, and I was going through their book, their catalog, And I go, wow, they do cookbooks. Wow, we should do this. So it
Hmm.
just comes from just a kernel of an idea, even if this is the main thing someone gets out of this podcast today, that they do it now before their folks are gone, or collect
Yeah.
recipes that are handwritten by my mother. I have those.
Yeah. And that's what I mean. I printed it on on PicMonkey or Shutterfly.
Okay.
So I printed it as if it was a photo book.
Yes.
And so that's how I did it.
Oh, okay. I did
So I
mine
mean,
lulu.com. They'll do that.
yeah. So
Okay.
there's a lot of other options. And I've written children's books for my grandkids that way too.
What a great
Like,
idea.
so I think sometimes we feel like, oh, I'm not a published author. And I think the other thing too that keeps people is that if you are of a certain age, every single thing that you wrote as a child had two grades. It had one for content and one for grammar. So you are so used to the red pen mentality
Mhm.
that keeps you like, well, I don't know about the grammar. I'm like, you know what? If you're that stressed about it, have somebody look it over. But otherwise, think about if, I've told somebody, think about your life if you were to actually do that one thing that you really wanted to do.
Okay.
Now think about your life if you never try.
Mm.
Don't let the red pen stress keep you from doing something that you should be doing. So,
I think the red pen in our generation is social media, because I'll see something and go, oh, they've already done it, so I shouldn't, or
oh,
or I can't, because they've already done it and it's better than I could do. So social media feeds this comparative thing where we are comparing ourselves and we come up short. Where
mm,
God says, just compare yourself with me, and of course you're going to come up short. But hey, I've given you these talents, and you need to act on them. Bob Goff said once, yes, you do compare yourself with others, but it's for inspiration. It's not for you to feel so bad
yeah,
that you
yeah,
can't take the next step. And yet that is the red pen, I think, of
yeah.
today's society. Now you came up with this cute magazine. What made you think of writing a Southern Christian Writer magazine? This is your very first, and I was honored to get a couple copies at the thing. But you also have a free version or something that they could get on your website.
Yeah, if you go to marciseither.com, you can download the whole magazine for free.
Wow, so nice of you to do that.
So, because you know how it is, if you're a writer, you have publishers who say, "Okay, we need you to build a platform. We're not going to give you hammer, nails, plans, plywood, anything like that, but you go build that thing and you let us know when it's ready." You're
Tell me
like,
how it's going.
yeah. And so I just thought, first of all, it's Southern Christian Writer because I love the thought of hospitality. And I think the Southern, living here, the Southern hospitality definitely has a certain niche. You don't have to be Southern to read it. You don't have to be Southern to be in it.
You have to be
Um,
a writer to read it.
no, I tell people it's for readers, eaters, and writers.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah, because and I wanted to, like, Holly is on the cover,
Mhm.
but I wanted people to be able to read about people that they might not have met yet,
Okay.
and to read the reason behind their stories. And so because of no, I mean, when I interviewed Holly, I learned a lot, and I had known her before, but I learned even more about who she was as a writer. And the gal who did the editing on this, she called me and she said, I am totally crying and I'm ordering both of Holly's books. Like, it made her fall in love with her even more.
I did the same because I met her in person,
Mm-hmm.
get a lot of one-on-one time with her. Then I read your magazine, and that impressed me so much, her whole process of how
Yeah.
she came to write a book where and she has like nine and that she wants to write, and she's traditionally published, and she's extreme introvert, she told me. You couldn't tell that when you met her. But anyway, to read their backstory makes their creativity so much more approachable, I think.
It does. And then also, like, because I am a learn by doing person,
Me too.
I have this QR code
Yeah.
where people can watch the interview. So I interviewed her, and then I mean, I wasn't anticipating to tape it. Like, my camera rose way down here. I look like a basset hound. She looks gorgeous. And I'm like, oh, Holly, tell me about your favorite. And then, but it was such a wonderful interview. I saved it. I edited it. I added music to the front, and then I put it up on YouTube, and I made a QR code so people can go to the queue to watch it. But if you're a creative person, what happens is you start learning how to do things. You start learning how to build things, to create things. But then what do you do with that? Mm-hmm. So I just thought, you know what? All the stuff I love doing food photography. People are always like, oh, share the recipe, share the recipe. So I either share it or I totally don't because I'm busy. And I'm like, you can read, look it up, but, then I thought, you know what? I am going to do that. And I'm going to share the recipes. Mm-hmm. And that way I have a place for people to go. And same with when I interview somebody, I'm just learning more about the art of interviewing. I'm learning more about, so this part here in the magazine, I always have a ministry moment. So this was on the Johnny and Friends, the Wheels Around the World. And so I just think that even as writers, there's other ministries out there that we don't know about. Mm-hmm. And so this just gives Johnny and Friends, this one part of her ministry, they have ended up donating 250,000 wheelchairs to third world countries that have been rehabbed and refabbed by prisoners in the prison system in the US, and the impact it has had on those prisoners. And so I just thought, you know what? Who else would read about that? Just the people maybe at Ministry Watch. Yeah. But because I put it in there. So the new catalog I have, the new magazine I have coming out, has a photographer that is just phenomenal. And I said, can you share with that? And he had talked about just start where you're standing. It had such a great thought for the grow that I'm wanting to make sure that people who are creatives have a place where they can showcase their work too. So
what did he mean by start where you're standing?
Well, I kind of came up with that. Start with where you're standing is the fact that people always think, oh, when I get to here, okay, I will start. And where should I start in writing? And they want to know, like, if it is their life story, where should I start? Should I start like my earliest memories falling off the tricycle? Or should I start, all this? No, start where you're standing. Start right where you are. And then if you work backwards, you can work backwards. But if you can start where you're standing, that's exactly where to start. Mm-hmm. So that's how it is with photography for him.
I had the privilege of interviewing Johnny for this podcast.
And yeah.
I think it was episode 100, and she told our listeners about this fabulous ministry. So it was so fun to read it again in your magazine because it helps the prisoners so much. She says it's a win-win-win. It helps the person who needs the wheelchair. It helps the person who needs to get rid of their wheelchair. And it helps the prisoner who feels like they're doing something productive in prison.
Yes. And it also helps the ministries where those wheelchairs are going, because it gives them contact with people, but it also helps the families who maybe they've had a child who's passed away. Right. And they have this empty wheelchair, and it's comforting for them to know that, another child is going to need this.
I would call that a 5-time win, though.
Yeah.
What she said. Yeah. Okay. So if a person is feeling stuck in their creativity, or even doesn't think that they are creative, and they're saying, okay, I'm going to start where I'm standing, what would be their next step? Would it depend on the creative effort? Would it be if it's cooking, if it's writing, if it's painting?
If they are really feeling stuck, maybe they've just moved someplace. I mean, I actually took tap dancing at the local junior college in Vista because it was cheaper. I always thought I would go back to tap dancing. I mean, I had taken tap when I was pregnant. I had talked to a friend into taking tap dancing, and then I found out I was pregnant with number 6. So my tap dancing was kind of cut short. I tapped until like I was 3 months or 3 weeks before delivery, but that was it. Then you have 6 kids, you're not going to be doing that. But then I always thought, when Jack gets older, when the youngest gets older, I would love to someday go back to tap dancing. And, some people just leave it there. They just are like, oh, I'll never do tap dancing again. I'm not that great of a tap dancer, but you know what? I loved it. It was great exercise. And so I looked it up in the local junior college. I thought it was cheaper for me to enroll in the local junior college and take tap 1 for 3 semesters. I have to tell you, I am on the honor roll. For, I would get notification, congratulations, you're on the honor roll. I'm like, I didn't take physics. Like,
You got
but I got, well, and I had to I didn't realize you could opt out, grade or no grade. And so I didn't know that. So I had to actually do a written final and a dance final. So, but you know what? I know how to shuffle and, but just do something. So then start, if people are thinking, well, I can't afford that. What does the local library have? I just found out there is there's a choir here. We're involved with 2 choirs here, but there's local things to get involved with. So if you're not sure about your creativity, get involved with somebody. I just did a biscuit making class for special needs adults. I mean, there's always something you can do. And I feel like our world gets really small if we are the center and we don't ever open up our world to other possibilities. I just came back from California. I was sitting next to somebody and we were talking about something, and they were shocked the fact that when our kids wanted to come back home and I had homeschooled our son, I had him sign up to be a candy striper. And he was like, so you made him volunteer without pay? Like, I would never volunteer. Why would you do that?
Oh, wow.
And I thought, you know what? I think there's a lot of people out there who just don't understand that volunteering is a gift to yourself, really.
Why?
And so if there's people who feel stuck, maybe they need to volunteer someplace and get outside of their own world a little bit.
It's so true. I call hospitality self-serving sanctification, because to be hospitable is a command. It's not a suggestion. And yet, the person who doesn't feel like they can do it or don't want to, or their mom didn't do it, or what's holding them back, to realize that God's commands are for our good, and that when we go ahead and take the first step, we are the ones, our hearts get so filled up. And it's like volunteer is the same thing.
Yeah. So that's what I would tell if somebody's feeling stuck.
Okay.
Just find out where they can take a class. Could be through adult ed.
Yeah.
There's always those classes.
Well, we're going to be giving away a copy of your book. You just need to make a comment in the show, either Instagram, social media, or send me an email, sue@welcomeheart.com, or leave a comment on my website when this comes out. Now, Marci, we started off by talking about the Biscuit Book Club on radio, no less. How do we join this? And I do make a good biscuit. And will you share your biscuit recipe?
Oh yeah, the recipe, I will put that in the show notes. The recipe is amazing.
Okay.
So Lakeside Retreat is the book that is a 40-day devotional on life-giving devotions from a restful shore.
Okay.
And then I have biscuits in a small cookbook that I created as a companion, just like as a giveaway for this. But the biscuits, I took a biscuit making class with my mom after we moved to Tennessee from a gal named Marianne, and she was hilarious.
Okay.
I mean, she'd be like, okay, well, if you're in a bad mood, biscuits have a temperament. So if you're in a bad mood, don't even bother making biscuits. And if you're Aunt Berta, she's in a bad mood and she comes over and knocks on the door and your biscuits aren't out of the oven, you just let her stand on the porch, honey, till those biscuits are safe and out. I'm like, oh my word. So, yeah.
So how did this radio show get started?
So the Biscuit Book Club was going to be a podcast. I met Shelly Sulfridge at Vision Writers Conference, and she had said, have you ever thought about doing a podcast? And I said, well, I had, but it's so much work. As you know. And so we kind of looked into it, like, what would it be? So it's called the Biscuit Book Club, and we talk about books, biscuits, and everything in between. So we've had Bill Myers on, we've had Sarah Sundin on, Robin Jones Gunn is going to be on, and we have just.
So it is a podcast. It is a podcast.
Well, it's a radio show that is going to also be a podcast.
Okay.
So we are working on the podcast part, but because I was on Focus on the Family with the Empty Nest book, and I mentioned that in our small group, and the guy who leads the small group said he had a radio show for 32 years. He still has one. He's like, you're going to be on Focus tomorrow? Our station carries Focus on the Family. I should have you call in. Like, can you call in at 6:45 so I can interview you before your show? I said, oh, better yet, I'll come in at 6:30 and I'll bring biscuits. So I had talked about my magazine, talked about the fact that with him personally about wanting to start a podcast. And he said, there has been in our schedule, how would you feel about having a radio show? You should have your own radio show. I said, well, I really can't think about that because the podcast is so overwhelming. He's like, no, no, no. If you have a radio show, first of all, you do have to get sponsors for it, but the engineer takes care of all that. And then they just hand you the MP3 when they're done. And then you drop that into your podcast. So all the engineering is done. And I was like, oh, really? Okay. And then he said, well, this is it. There is it costs to be on the air. So you need to get sponsors. And I thought, well, there goes that dream. It came and it went, kind of like my thoughts of making sure my socks match. But then my husband, he has a business, he said, I'll sponsor you for the first couple months. So Semper Fi Hauling is the sponsor of Biscuit Book Club. And we are on once a week on WJRZ and at 10:30. And we will be putting together a podcast called the Biscuit Book Club so that people can go back and listen to all those past episodes. So we're hoping by mid-August.
Like everybody listening would be able to clue into that radio show, or only people in Tennessee?
Yeah, 10:30. No, there's also a website, so if you could do it online and internet, WJRZ.com.
Okay.
And I think I sent that to you. WJRZ. We're on Saturday mornings, our time at 10:30 in the morning.
Okay, so
which is 7:30 your time.
Okay.
And Sarah Sundin's going to be on this next Saturday. So I'm very excited about that.
Well, I'd be happy to talk to you about my biscuits and my books.
Yeah.
I'd be happy.
So we're excited about it and the fact that it will be a podcast. And Shelly she's from the South. So she's living in Alaska as a missionary, but she's from the South. So when she and I talk, it totally works because I'm living in Knoxville. She lived in Knoxville for 12 years.
Okay.
But so when she says, keep it cozy, keep reading and keep it cozy, y'all, it sounds so real and genuine. Whereas if I were to say it, I sound like I'm trying to sound like somebody else. So anyway.
You say that you love talking about legacy. What is your legacy and why do you love talking about it?
So my legacy, I would have to say, is just the art of, I guess it would be hospitality. And I do love the fact that our kids, all of the kids, have really kind of embraced that, where we had 6 kids. So kind of the theme was, if there's room on the floor, there's room for more. And there was always room at the table for one more plate. So the kids knew if they had friends come over and it was getting dinner time and their friends maybe didn't even have a good home to go to, they would be like, so what do you think? Mom, set another plate. There was always room for more. And I even had my son who told me, he goes, Mom, do you think you could make me another sandwich? And at the time, there was a little bit of tension between him and I. And he's like, do you think you can make me another sandwich for school? I said, well, yeah, but, are you not getting enough to eat or what's going on? He's like, no, I was eating lunch. I always packed our kids' lunches until they graduated from high school.
Me too.
It's like I was eating lunch and a kid next to me said, he said, is that a real sandwich? And he's like, yeah. Is that homemade jam? He's like, yeah, my mom makes her own jam. And the kid just looked at him and Scott said, yeah, she makes her own bread too. So this is a real sandwich. And the kid got all quiet. He's like, could I come and live at your house?
Oh.
Because he didn't know who his dad was. His mom was in jail. He was living with his grandparents. And so just the act of packing, and so I packed an extra sandwich for my son for the rest of the school year. And I just think that that's where hospitality lands. It doesn't have to be the big meal. It doesn't have to be an Evite and making sure the linens are ready. It just has to be a heart who is caring about other people, to love them as, as Christ loves them, and see them as Christ sees them, not judging, not closed hearted, but even people who are different, but just allow them to sit at our table. And so I think that that's the thing I really want our family to remember about me. And I'm glad when I see that my kids open their homes and their hearts to other people as well.
When I interviewed my mother on doing hospitality, I thought my mother was known as the hospitality queen, though not with perfection, just with welcome. And
Mm-hmm.
but she told me a funny story about when she was first married and dad invited the deacon board over for pie and coffee. And she goes, I can make pie, I just couldn't make coffee. And how she ruined the whole thing and had put the ice cream on all the pieces of pie. And then she couldn't get the vacuum top off the coffee pot. And so then the ice cream melted everywhere. And she kept saying, I was mortified, Sue. I was mortified. And I never use that word, but I said, Mama, I'm mortified just listening to this story. Why did you just have the men? Why didn't you just have the men come in the kitchen and fix the coffee pot? They were all engineers like my dad, I'm sure. And she goes, well, I would do that now, but I was so insecure that I just
Oh,
felt deeper and deeper into the hole. But see, by the time I came on the scene, I was 4 of 5 kids. She had practiced. And so when you practice doing something that's hard, it becomes easier for the sake of your guest. And so that's why we practice. We don't practice to get perfect. We practice to be at
right.
ease so that we can welcome that child who needs a sandwich. One of my daughter's friends, was her parents were going through a divorce, and so she would come over all the time, and she would go right into my pantry. I could find her in my pantry looking for non-chocolate things because she was like the only friend who didn't like chocolate. So I would keep fig Newtons or fruit cups in the pantry
Mm-hmm.
for her girlfriend, and she remembers that to this day. So that
Mm-hmm.
tiny thing, like you said, a sandwich can make such a difference in someone's life, and it makes them say, hey, there is a God after all. I got a homemade sandwich.
Yeah. And I didn't even meet that kid till graduation day. Never even had seen him, never met him. And you know what? That's between him and the Lord. So I don't know, I didn't say, okay, but he's gonna have to go to church with us. Like it was just see a need, fill a need. And there was some kids who had come over, and one kid was a little bit on the spectrum. And so I was very careful, because if I had baked, he loved cupcakes, but if I had baked and I had more out than there were enough kids for, he would be like, just who gets the extra cupcake? He would be so fixated on that. So I'd always just put out exactly what I needed to. And then I said, I'm going to be gone. I'll be right back. They were in high school,
Yeah.
and we lived right next to the high school. So it was not uncommon for them to run home in between school and track practice. I said, I'm going to be right back, but help yourself to a cupcake. I love you guys. And it was probably a year or two later. He's like, so Mrs. Seither, I just wanted to talk to you about something that you left at the house one time. And I'm like, okay, what is it? He goes, so I came over there and you had cupcakes and you said that you would be back and that you loved us. And I'm just wondering, like, was I part of the us, or was it just for your kids us?
Oh,
I'm like, oh, it was for you. You are part of us. And
wow.
he was just like, yeah, I thought so.
That makes me cry. That's a great story. My last question is, how does your life embody God's welcoming heart? I think you just showed us by that story. Anything else you'd like to add on legacy?
Um, I don't think so. I just think that we need to be observant of what's going on in our lives. We need to be cognizant of how people around us are feeling and how we can impact their lives.
Hmm.
And we need to not be so stressed over having everything perfect that we can't show up in the messy middle. So start where you're standing and reach out to the neighbor across the street or the neighbor next to you, or whatever it is, but do something. If you're not dead, God's not done.
I love that. I think that's so true. If you're not dead, God is not done. Well, this has been a delight, and I think you also will give away your devotional. Is that correct?
Yeah, so Lakeside Retreat, it was put out by Tyndale, 40 devotions, and it's a great read. It's a beautiful book.
It is a beautiful book. I have one.
I did most of the photos, so I was kind of that was a drone photo I did, but I did most of the photos, and there's great recipes in here, but just a lot of great devotionals about resting and it makes you feel it's a great read right now for just feeling rest.
Oh, thank you so much for providing that, and also the magazine as well. And how can people find you, Marci?
Go to marciseither.com. That's Marci Seither, which is like either with an S. So it's SEITHER.com. So marciseither.com.
Fabulous. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Wasn't that a great conversation, especially if you feel like you are stuck in your creativity, or maybe you don't even think that you are creative? I'd love to have you share a story with me of what creative path God is leading you on, or you think God is leading you on. And I hope that you were encouraged by Start Where You're Standing and other things that Marci shared with us today. So if you'd like to share your story of creativity or how God is leading you at any age, my email is sue@welcomeheart.com. Sue@welcomeheart.com. Have a wonderful day.